Okay, yeah, so this is part of the Immanent Urbanisms series. This is a series of lectures, talks, discussions about bottom-up uses of urban space. The general idea, and I'm going to talk more about this as I introduce the panel, is that a very narrow set of interests were behind producing what it's like to live in cities and the actual physical spaces of cities. And despite this, a quite diverse set of interests and activities have found a way to flourish in cities by people misusing urban spaces, so using them in ways that are sort of against the ways that they were designed to be used. And this practice is relatively under-theorized, and it doesn't quite have its own discourse, especially in the architecture, planning, urban design worlds. And so the series is sort of our way of trying to sort of kickstart this topic outside of academia, because people in the real world are really interested in it and hopefully making it relevant for academia. What's cool is it's been this nice collaboration between academics and people who are doing stuff, and the panels are really a chance for us to talk to people who are doing stuff in the world, not just writing about it and theorizing about it. And so it's been this nice connection of these two worlds of doing and thinking. So yeah, with that, I think I will start the panel. So yeah, temporary autonomous zones. I just want to look at this sort of idea, which was pioneered by Hakim Bey, or introduced by Hakim Bey in his 1991 book. But I want to look at it in sort of three parts, right? Temporary, autonomy, and zones. And I'm actually going to start with autonomy. So autonomy from what? So yeah, for me, autonomy is really an important type of autonomy, I think, is the economic type of autonomy. So, as I mentioned a minute ago, quite narrow sets of interests have been behind shaping and running cities. And if we look back through urban history at this moment of enclosures that happened in England in the 15th and 16th centuries, what you have were wool producers closing off the commons to produce private property so they could sell wool as merchants to the rest of Europe and to urban markets. And this huge process of dispossession occurred there. So there are all these people who were sort of living off the land under feudalism, who suddenly were forced into cities to get jobs to afford the things that they used to just get for themselves for free off the land. So it's this really interesting double process of people being forced off the land and into cities, and the land itself being turned into private property. But it's not just a one-time thing. It's not like this happened way back, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and then it was over. It actually continues to happen today. So there are things like NAFTA, for example, where there are lots of people who lived off the sea or off the land, who actually worked not very much. They didn't have to work a lot. And this big trade agreement privatized a bunch of that land, a bunch of those what were commons, and made them into private property. And so you had this huge influx of people into cities off of that land. So they were dispossessed of the land. They're forced into cities. They had to work a lot, live in conditions of squalor, whereas previous, it's arguable that they were living much better. And of course, they're working much, much more than they were when they were subsisting off the land. I'm also interested in looking at the ways in which land today is basically accounted for in both cities and the countryside. It has ownership, it has purpose. It's not like people just, it's not like there's just open space and you can just do whatever you want. So I think when we think about autonomy, space is this really crucial aspect. Especially when you live in a city, it's like everything is it's just accounted for, and there's a plan for space. All space has some kind of a plan, and probably whatever thing that you want to do is not part of that plan. So what are those things that account for most space? Well, commerce, government, work, leisure, and that's about it. I guess transportation as well as circulation. And what's interesting is these spaces, they work in a sort of synchrony. So you go to work to afford stuff to take home, and you use the public streets to do those things. It's like a perfect system that doesn't imagine that it has an outside, but there totally are outsides. And I think that this notion of autonomy is like an example of people space according to things that sort of fall outside of that system, so that don't neatly fit the commerce, governmental, work, or leisure practice of the city. And this way, it's sort of, I see it as sort of similar, like our plan being sort of similar to retirement, where like people want to like carve a little piece of that space of the city for themselves, where they can like go and do their own thing. So people like buy land or buy a house or whatever. The thing is, you have to work a ton to buy that house or buy that land, and so you have to like, the only way to like get out of the system is to like fully do the system. It's kind of like retirement, like you have to work a lot in order to get retirement to then have like freedom from work. I find this really distressing. I know a lot of people find this really distressing, that the only way out of the system is through the system to like capitalize on land. So like leisure is also another weird thing. So we tend to think of like leisure as being the opposite of work. So like leisure is the time when you're free to do what you want, but usually it's actually monetized and commodified, and leisure in a lot of ways is like part of your work day. Like if you're working all day, leisure is like the time where you like buy your work. So if you're shopping or whatever, or you're going on vacations, the money that you're spending is actually earning you more work. You sort of have to like pay off whatever you're doing in your leisure time, or you're resting and recuperating for work. So it's just like, it has this interesting relationship to work. It's often commercial. There's also the economic, social, political, and normative structures, I think, that are imposed. So if I'm talking mostly about economics, I think there's also like a lot of social and normative systems that people feel constrain them in their behaviors. And so I think the notion of autonomy that Hakim Bey describes in his book is very much dealing with not just economic autonomy, but also cultural, social, political, and normative. Now I want to think more about temporary. So why temporary? What makes a temporary zone more effective than a permanent zone? So I have this really interesting colleague. His name's Brent Sterklausen, and he did this amazing thesis on Native Americans and the ways in which they were driven off the land by the grid system that the federal government set up in the late 1800s. So there's this it was called the Public Land Survey System. It's this grid system. You can still see it today. There's, if you look at like a map of the Midwest, for example, just this fat grid laid on it with, I think there were 1 mile by 1 mile plated lots. And what happened was, when they were carving up the land, they were incentivizing people to settle this land and put it into production, to like turn these basically open spaces into farmland. But unfortunately, there were all these Native Americans who were very much displaced by this process, and so what the federal government did, I think in the 1890s, was they came up with this Homesteading Act, where they would basically give Indians, or sell Indians land through this, like, it was almost like a predecessor to the federal government's Federal Housing Administration in the 1930s. And it was basically a program to put land into Native Americans' hands, and tied them to the land. And this is really important because people who had land and put it into production could be taxed, and they would also contribute to the economy. And you can see the sort of eagerness with which the government was trying to basically land these people who were, prior to this, nomadic. The fact is, nomads are really hard to tax and hard to profit off of, and it's also really hard to compel a nomad to work, because they have means of subsistence by moving around. So they can move from where resources are to other places where resources are. It's not the same as when you're stuck to a piece of land and forced to work for economic reasons. So yes, ephemerality is hard to tax. So finally, the zone. I think this is a really interesting thing to think about. So what makes something a zone? I think for Hakim Bey, it's really clear that a zone is a thing that you say is different than everywhere else. Like, you draw a line in the sand and you say it's different on this side of the land, or on this side of the line. And in talking with people who started Burning Man, for example, this is sort of where the whole idea started. It was just like they literally drew a line in the sand and said, we're going to behave differently on the other side of this line. So in this way, it's really, I think, psychological, but I think it's also aesthetic. So, when you go to Burning Man today, it's arguable whether or not Burning Man is still a temporary autonomous zone. You feel like you're in a different world, right? There's something about its aesthetics that sets it apart from the everyday world of, say, San Francisco, or wherever you're coming from. And so I think there's also something about like a feeling of isolation, that like you're in a place that is set aside from other spaces. So not just aesthetic, but also somewhat spatially pushed away from everyday life. And I think this notion of the island is a really interesting one that King Bay actually draws on in the book. I want to read this quote for you. The sea rovers and corsairs of the 18th century created an information network that spanned the globe. Primitive and devoted primarily to grim business, yet the net nevertheless functioned admirably. Scattered through the net were islands, remote hideouts where ships could be watered and provisioned, booty traded for luxuries and necessities. Some of these islands supported intentional communities, whole mini societies living consciously outside the law and determined to keep it up, even if only for a short but merry life. So I thought that was really interesting, this idea of these many islands that maybe were temporary, perhaps were getting settled and unsettled all the time, that the pirates were taking back from colonial interests and whatever in the late 19th century, but also these coves and inlets. These things operated. There were archipelagos and there were archipelagos and ports and islands, and I think that these sort of start to form into something of a diagram for like strategies of what can be done. So I want to talk a little bit about archipelagos. I feel like perhaps if we were setting up little moments of ephemeral difference, they can be most effective if you can hop from one to another. So if we set little spaces that are outside of the economy or outside of certain normative or political structures, that they become effective when you can bounce from them in sort of like an island hopping fashion, kind of like he's describing in the book for these pirates. They had a whole sort of like sub-society woven throughout the existing society. And I think this is where the subtitle of this panel comes from, which is this idea that perhaps these moments of difference could be stitched together into something larger. It's a question, it's a hypothesis. And I think they become effective when they compete in this thing that isn't talked about very much, but it's the time economy. That is, like, people spend their lives in time, and there's a lot of things that compete over that time, whether it's work or leisure or civic duties. There are all these transportation. There are all these things that compete over your time, and perhaps a big way to start finding some amount of autonomy would be to spend your time differently. And I think we need spaces and structures that do this, and I hope some of these case studies here will describe moments in which people have found different ways to spend time and be with each other. But I think it's interesting because it exists parallel to these enclosures. So if you've got this archipelago of free spaces or moments of difference, it's not that they overwhelm or overpower or overthrow the existing structures, it's just that they're cleverly woven in between. I'm also interested in this idea of ports. So we could think sort of communes, I think, as ports. So we do things here that make space for other things that are free and exist maybe outside of the system. So we do participate to the degree that we need to keep our lights on and pay our taxes and pay our rent. But then we free up a bit of space to do things like have discussions or make other, perhaps other moments of other societies possible. And yeah, I think another important aspect of all this is the infrastructure side. So it's not like just because these things are temporary, there's no physical aspect of them. It's clear that there's objects that make it possible to do this. I feel like that those infrastructures are actually of three varieties. So they're physical, they're digital, and they're social. So the physical is fairly obvious. If you're going to do things in space, you need to meet human needs in some way, or at least delight the senses. And so you need things like electricity and ways of cooking food, water, I don't know, just stuff that makes it possible for people to inhabit space, warmth, shelter, whatnot. But I'm also really interested in the possibilities of digital infrastructures for accommodating temporary autonomous zones. So whether it's possible to produce apps or websites or other digital means of connecting people either to each other or to various events or happenings, I think the digital potential here is really huge. And we are definitely finding all sorts of digital platforms that are defying the sort of conventional systemic and planned uses of space and time. And then the other one is the social, and I feel like social infrastructures, and by this I of course mean culture, are really important. Things like art, music, reading groups, salons, lectures, these are sort of the things that we're trying to make space for. But it seems like these sort of three things together could make temporary autonomous zones into like a more meaningful and impactful thing. And I'm definitely interested in exploring those things. So I'm going to talk about a real example. So now I'm shifting from panel structurer to a practitioner of weird urban stuff. So I started this organization called Spontaneum that a lot of us sort of collectively have made happen. We throw these weird urban events. This is a Halloween event that we had on Treasure Island, and you know, it seems like a party, and I think for most people who go to them, it's a party. Like the events that we have, it's really clear that it's like, yeah, a lot of people go to party. But actually, there's a more sort of subversive and considered thing that we're doing, which is we're trying to go after and target those things that the economy provides and provide them for free in more interesting ways. So from things like movies, this is a big projected movie that we did on the side of an abandoned grain silo down on Pier 90 in the dog patch. Art, this was a blue light party that Laurel back there planned, where people used their bodies to paint on canvases and everything was lit up blue. We used blue paint, and we had these big sort of art murals afterwards. Food, this is alleyway dinners, which we've done a lot of now, where we basically heat up and serve free soup in an alley, and then people are invited to bring all sorts of other things to augment the soup. They've been really, really wonderful. Or just a place to chill and read your book. This is a reading group we did last Sunday, where we just set up this big yurt on the beach and had a DJ reading party where everyone read. At the end, we sort of summarized what we were reading to each other. So it's just like a nice moment of collectivity that we created in this otherwise sleepy place. So we deal with autonomy in the sense that our events are always free. They're always participatory. People co-host events and collaborate on events. And we basically never get permission when we throw events. And that's really crucial for us because we don't have any budget. And the second you get permission, it's like, okay, you're paying somebody something, you're paying some tax, or applying and paying fees. So we just circumvent all that. They're temporary, so we get to like hang out in these really amazing, scenic, beautiful, sought-after locations and have these incredible experiences. And what makes that possible is precisely the fact that what we're doing is extremely temporary. We set up, we take down, and we do that all basically in one night. So we do our event, set up, take down all in a night, and therefore we can't be regulated. And when we are, we just go somewhere else and do it there. So, so this is sort of like what's made this little bit of culture that we've created possible, is like not settling on like, this is our building or this is our space and we're gonna inhabit it forever. It's like, it's very much an ephemeral thing, and that's precisely what makes it so awesome. And zone is the other part of this. So the events always set themselves apart in a really intentional way from like everyday life. And we really try to like dramatize that feeling that like you have to like wander through the dark for a while, and then you stumble across this like pink glowing tent, and then you come in and it's warm and there's a bubble machine and music and people reading and furs everywhere. It's just like, it's meant to feel totally different from the things that you ordinarily encounter. Another thing we use really often is lighting. This is one of our alleyway dinners, and I found that this is really awesome. They have, it's hard to find like cheap, really bright lights, but they make really cheap grow lights because people are cultivating marijuana everywhere indoors. And you get really cheap, very bright pink lights for growing weed, and so we use it for events. And it has a glow that's like you don't see this in the city ordinarily. Like it's very different. And so we try to like make the aesthetics of these events really stand out. There's another case where we used paintball smoke bombs at an event that just like made a weird aura here in the fern gardens of the park. It's just like this incredible experience. I guess this is another environment that made possible with black lights and glow in the dark bubbles. So the zone aspect is very present for us, just setting ourselves apart aesthetically, psychologically. And what's nice is actually when you make this aesthetic space, like when you create this space that feels different, people actually start behaving differently. And that's been really interesting to us. Like things that weren't possible, like, I don't know, being generous to strangers, somehow become possible when like there's purple bubbles flying around you, you know? It's weird, or like, yeah, when people are naked or whatever, it's just like, it's totally different, and therefore anything's possible, it feels like. So there's another thing that I just want to touch on really briefly, which is that ephemerality is being appropriated very much by commercial and governmental culture. So there are these pop-up restaurants, pop-up shipping container malls, pop-up stores, pop-up urbanism, and I don't think the goal here is autonomy. So while they are temporary, they're not autonomous. Things like this is tactical urbanism. It's actually designed to help governments make decisions about how to more effectively govern their populations. And, you know, we could get in a lot of debate about whether governments perhaps deep down have good intentions. I'm sure tons of people in the government have good intentions. I'm sure the people behind tactical urbanism have good intentions. The goal is not to get people free of regulation or control. It is to make those apparatuses of regulation control more effective and more aligned perhaps with the desires of people. Who knows, maybe this type of incorporation is really good, but I just want to like put it on our minds as like an instance where like not all temporary things are bottom up. There's a lot of like top down interest in like tapping into this bottom up culture and aesthetic. It's also worth mentioning that even bottom up things can be part of like a strategy of gentrification, and we worry about this a lot with Spontaneum. Like, are we just making a really desirable and expensive city even more culturally desirable by having these awesome events? Like, are we just making it so that more people want to live here and people will spend more on the real estate? I'm not sure, but these are just some questions I wanted to end on. I didn't want to end really optimistically. But perhaps I'll turn it over to Chris now, and he can talk about ephemeral here.
Thank you, Eric. So first I'll show you a brief video of what ephemeral is, and then I'll go into how it came to be and why I participated. Is there a sound? Yeah, if there's. I don't know if this video has sound. Mandeville Point and the Delta, the Sacramento River Delta near Stockton. And at the beginning of the video, we saw the bump bed, which was a giant bus. There goes the Artemis, which is Artemis, which is a art boat at the festival. At the beginning, you saw the bump bed, which is a big bus that has like a 20,000 watt speaker system that was floated onto a barge and floated out to the Delta, and the Robert Gray, which is another large utility boat. Another art boat coming up on the left. That's Karen Smith's boat. I don't remember the title of it. And then this big island here is called Titan, and it's probably the biggest island, or was the biggest island, ephemeral 2015. As you can see, there are bridges connecting the different raft ups of boats, including a platform in the center, with hands out to see the overall design of the structure. So we have the dance platforms at the top, and hands out enough to see. Bridges. That big bridge off to the left is going to another island. So we call it the Titan Archipelago. And the keyboard bridge you see at the top there went to a sanctuary. It was still under construction when that video was taken.
So Ephemeral was started in 2009 by a nonprofit called the Sea Studying Institute. The mission of the Sea Studying Institute was to promote the idea of building floating cities on the ocean. So the goal is to create many Singapores, Hong Kongs on the ocean that are not tied to any particular geographic area. And the motivation for that was the observation that a lot of governments do a really crappy job. For example, the North Korean government, the Cuban government, or sometimes even the US government, do things that the citizens of that country don't want, don't like, and would not support if they had a choice. They don't have a choice. They don't have an easy choice because switching between governments is really hard. Right now you have to immigrate, win a national election, or stage a successful national revolution if you want to change policy at a national level, and that's very difficult. Or you can go through Congress, which is also very difficult, hard, and a long-term problem. So the idea was that if you made it easier for people to switch between governments or to create new governments, then existing governments would have an incentive to try to do things to retain their citizens, to retain their tax base, and therefore would be more responsive to their citizens and do things that they actually wanted. In addition, while our governments now are much better than they may have been in the past, there's no reason to think that they're the pinnacle of government technology. There's a lot of ways that people are unsatisfied with them. And so the Sea Studying Institute wanted to create a way to experiment, to try different kinds of social systems, and then let the market decide, let people vote with their feet. So if you didn't like the government that you were part of, you could either go to a different one easily, or start a new one relatively easily. The problem is a lot of sea studiers enthusiasts were Silicon Valley engineers who didn't have a lot of boating experience. And the ocean is an extremely harsh environment. So Ephemeral was started as a way to give sea studying enthusiasts an opportunity to build a community on the water, get some boating experience in a way in which they weren't likely to die, and have a big party. As the event has progressed, that's changed a little bit. Now there's a lot more people who live on the boats full time. They like living in the water, but they're not necessarily politically aligned with the Sea Studying Institute. And there's a much bigger party crowd than there used to be. So it's become, I'd say it's probably 60-70% Burning Man on the water and 30% like sea studying enthusiasts at this point. The first one was held in June 2009 at Bengal Tip. It was picked in part because I think it feels pseudo-remote, which means that when you're there, it feels like you're away from civilization, that you're freed from the bounds of what's going on. But it's kind of a toy anarchy in that you're still within the bounds of the US government. You're 20 minutes from shore, 20 minutes from the Lowe's, 20 minutes from the police, if need be. So it's not really remote, but it feels that way. So what I showed you, the video was from Ephemeral 2015. This is from the first Ephemeral. Now keep in mind that this was fairly big and ambitious because the Sea Studying Institute put $30,000 to $50,000 into the production. The year after, the Sea Studying Institute decided not to do it because the insurance costs were too high. They were quoted prices of $300 a person for the barge that they wanted to bring out. So about a month before the event, they decided not to do it, and a bunch of the people who were enthusiastic decided to, why not just do it ourselves? And so they did, and ever since then, Ephemeral has been organized by the community. There are no central organizers, there are no barriers to coming, there are no ticket sales. 2012 was an important year. It was the first year that we split into separate islands. Prior to that, we'd all been centrally managed from the top down, which as the event got bigger, became really unwieldy and just too much work for any one person to do, especially on a volunteer basis. So we broke into smaller islands. That year, we were also very ambitious. We built two 28-foot by 24-foot platforms. And we experienced really, for us, harsh weather conditions, like 35-mile-per-hour winds, which caused one of the islands to break free of its anchors and start drifting into the other islands. Which, imagine a bunch of libertarians who don't know how to sail trying to deal with their island crashing into another island at the same time. We realized at that point several things. One is we needed better anchoring. We needed a clear line of command for emergencies on an island. And we needed a way for we needed to do a better job of being better sailors and recognizing the people who were good sailors and paying attention to them quickly in times of need. Sorry, I guess you can't see that one. What you would have seen, how that picture came up, it was one of the islands that year was called Blanket Fort, and it was a ramshackle artist's hodgepodge of various things, and at the end of it they set it on fire with a flamethrower. So, having done this for 6 years now, this year will be the 7th, we've come across a lot of risks. Things that put people in danger, put the environment in danger, and the question is, how do you deal with that in an environment where there are no tickets, there's no boundaries, it's a public waterway, anyone can come. How do you handle that in that kind of environment? And some of the risks that we found were underestimating winds and currents, so people would try to swim between the islands, and every year we have to send someone out to rescue them because they underestimate the winds and the current. Drunk people and people who underestimate or overestimate their ability to handle psychedelics. So what you're looking at here is the instigating incident for the Ballad of Jack Frenzy. Jack decided to do massive amounts of LSD while these islands were breaking apart. And at a certain point, he thought that demons were coming after him, and so he jumped in the water and started swimming away naked. And we tried everything we could to get him out of the water. We sent a boat out to say, hey, come on, get in the boat. And he said, no, demons. And he would like dunk under the water. We sent out beautiful women in scanty clothes. He said, no, demons, in the water. So we were worried that he was going to drown, so we called the Coast Guard. Meanwhile, while the Coast Guard was on their way, another boat with burly men just like physically lifted him out of the water, took him back to one of the islands. He was resting in a room there, and Coast Guard arrives. They go in and they say, "You got 3 choices. You can stay here. You can go back to your friend's boat, or you can come with us and go to jail." He chose option 4, which was to throw off the blanket, run naked off the boat, jump in the water, and swim to shore, which is how this scenario happened. So he was a really good swimmer. He was training for a triathlon. So he gets to shore, he clambers up the hill. There's a road there that you can't see, and meanwhile the Coast Guard slowly follows him, and they sent 2 guys on the other side of him. He's up there, gets to the top of the road, and he's like, yeah, I escaped the demons. And of course, then the demons came up behind him and took him to jail. So this is his final flee. Fortunately for him, it just ended up being an embarrassing incident that we retell every year. But there are other things that have happened that have caused problems there. And fortunately, we've also been lucky that no one's been seriously injured and no one has died so far, knock on wood. And so one of the big things for the people who put on this event is like, how do you keep that record going? And how do you keep the people in the community around you happy? So some of the other things that happen, people dump sewage in the Delta. People bring their art boats and they put them together on the docks, and like they spend like 3 or 4 days doing this, and that irritates the people on the docks. People who don't know who run a boat, or who are drunk, running over anchor lines, or speeding in areas where people are swimming. Other bad actors. So these are the solutions we found so far. One is education documentation. Like, everyone who went through 2012 was like, we got to do better anchors. We've got to have better communication. And subsequent years, like, our anchoring has been a lot better because we spent hundreds, thousands of dollars on better anchors than mine. And we've communicated to people as they join, you really need to handle your anchors. Because when the winds come up, you can be in real trouble. Peer pressure. So far, a lot of the squashing of bad behavior stems from the fact that we're all friends, or friends of friends. But we're getting big enough now to do other things because, excuse me. So we're looking into things like reputation management and boundaries. So limiting how people can travel between the islands and vetting the people that can get on the island. Anyway, so it's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to doing it more. I'll close with a video from a boat I viewed, and actually, that's probably true. I'll just close. Any questions? Or do we take questions now, or?
Same for the end and having an overall discussion with that. You guys have a microphone down there. We'll try using that one too. Say yes. Cool.
Cool. I'm Kyle. I live here along with my partner, Brittany. We both had the fortunate adventure of being two of the original 9-ish co-founders of FreeSpace, which happened summer of 2013. So we'll kind of get into some stuff. I'll show a quick video from the very beginning of how everything got started.
Just have to drag it off to the other screen.
Okay.
Drag it to the left or right. Sure. Does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good for sure.
Is this free space that was done on market?
This is FreeSpace. Actually, this was the original FreeSpace before that.
This is FreeSpace, 1131 Mission Street, the whole month of June in San Francisco. Space is still raw and empty. And that's the point. It's kind of an experiment in space to see what you, the community, want to fill it with. Ideas, tables, chairs, events. And when a lot of people put their effort and passion into the space, making the city better and having a good time doing it, anything is possible.
Where did there's another one. There it shows me how to use his computer. So what you saw was 1131 Market Street. It's right at the corner of 7th and, Mission Street. 1131 Mission Street. Right at the corner of 7th and Mission. And that building was mostly an abandoned warehouse for many years. We had the ability to take over that space because one of our friends knew a landlord and found a way to kind of finagle a deal to get us into that building. He and his friends, Morgan Fitzgibbons, Mike Zuckerman, Morgan Fitzgibbons, were sitting around one day talking about a group called the Diggers, which was actually a kind of historical group here in the Haight during the Summer of Love in the 60s. They had a building over here on Cole Street, and they were a very counterculture outside of the normal society, especially for the 50s, or kind of coming out of the 50s into the 60s in the United States. And they really lived outside of the economic system. They ran a free store, which they were able to populate by acquiring items for their store through various means. They housed people, let them come use their space, were very much anti-money in a lot of ways. And out of this idea of the Diggers was kind of born the same idea for free space of what would happen if we had a physical space that we didn't charge people any money to use. Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better? Yeah. That was much better. So in the beginning, we got this 14,000 square foot warehouse. And as you saw in the video, there was nothing in it. The day after that video was filmed, about 40 people showed up to the space with brooms and sponges and cleaning supplies, and top to bottom, the entire space, cleaned the entire thing to get it ready for opening, which was then 2 days later. The entire process from like, hey, this is a good idea, to hey, we found a building, to hey, we have a lease and the doors are open was about 3 weeks. I happened to be running a nonprofit at the time that was crazy enough to sign a lease on this building. 3 other organizations said, no, what the hell are you talking about? What's gonna happen here? We have no idea, we're not gonna get involved in this. And when we finally moved in, we just invited the community to come and kind of ask them the question of, what do you want to have here? This is a free space. This isn't ours. We just happen to have it, but we want to give it to you and see what you can do with it. And so, very quickly, that's not what I want. There's supposed to be a link there. There we go.
It's been 10 days since Free Space kicked off, and so much has changed. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should probably watch this video first. If you do know what Free Space is, then just keep watching. We're going there again.
Welcome back, Ernesto. It's day number 10. Lots happened so far, and we're just going to do another walkthrough to kind of show what's taken place in the last 10 days. And thank you for coming on day 1, and check it out again. As you can see from the outside, done quite a bit of work. Artists have been showing up in force when they're given permission and space. Amazing things happen. So we'll take you out around back at first, but let's go through the building. So I said I planned on making this kind of passage for people through the space. So we've set up this kind of curtain wall. People will come through into the kind of orientation space. They can sign their waivers, they can express themselves, they can get a little context on what civic hacking is, what free space is all about, before they come into free space and figure out a way for them to participate. Sacred space, let's see, might be people around. Oh. What are you guys doing?
We're dancing.
Cool. Is this a good space for it? Without people intruding with cameras?
This is a beautiful people intruding with cameras.
Cool. Yes, this is the sacred space. People are ditching their shoes and their cell phones before they come in here, and using it for all sorts of whatever they want. Is this a call to certain thing? It's like...
It's called Adrian and Meredith's rehearsal.
Cool.
Dance rehearsal.
Awesome.
Movement room?
Tomorrow, like around 9.
Try this chair out.
I did once, but I'm not
You know what it is?
It's a hard to.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll work really well today. Sure. And then put your hands on here. Just relax. People brought a ping pong table and heartbeat amplifiers and got a great sound system now that's shown up, like really amazing and all free. We're blessed and really inspired by what everyone's showing up with. There's a sewing workshop going on. Stitch and bitch is the term.
This is our stitch and bitchin' sewing workshop. So people are bringing in old clothes that have been torn and fixed, and then we're using these skirts to make patterns and make new stuff.
There's like a lot of new sewers, a lot of people just needing refreshers, and we kind of brought a machine, someone brought a machine that they just got, didn't know how to use, so we're kind of just figuring it out.
Someone even brought a record player. Got Led Zeppelin on here.
I'm Julie, and this is my first time here to Django class. I'm really excited about it, and I just heard about this through word of mouth from one of my friends, and I'm really happy to contribute.
Wow, that's cool fabric. Wow, it's a dress. But yeah, it's a free spot where people can bring things, take them away. This is the inspiration wall where we're trying to keep it focused. People want to write on the walls to do it in one specific space, and this is kind of the space for that to happen. Kitchen and the dining room.
So it's kind of
Besides, LED
inside.
installation.
Hop out the outside real quick so you can kind of see what we do with that
Addition.
big ground floor space.
I found out about free space the very last week that Page Valley Farm was open. It's pretty insane. Mike came, I think for the final yoga class, and learned that we needed homes for a bunch of tables and chairs, and we also had soil to give away. And so they came and loaded up a truck and told us all about free space. And we sat there and said, that is such a cool thing to do on the first day that the farm is closed. So I'm getting to be creative in a lot of sun and a lot of dirt, which is a lot of fun.
So this is one of the new developments of the space. We've expanded to the parking lot next door. And originally we just got permission to use the crane to do the giant mural on the side of the building. But one of the graffiti artists assumed that meant he could start to paint. Max, or aka Eon. And then the parking lot owner showed up, and he was so amazed at how much progress we had made in just a day and a half that he said, "You have the green light, keep going, I don't want to get in your way." And then we've mobilized an entire crew of amazing local San Francisco street artists to basically fill this entire pit with a whole slew of murals. And tomorrow we're going to be having a gallery opening for this pit. So it's really, there was no plan of this whatsoever. This is a new development. We've rented the parking lot for the month, and just excited to have an outdoor space, because it's really hard to come across outdoor space here, and especially in Soma, where space usually goes to the highest bidder. This is a kind of interesting canvas because it has two broken walls, but if you look at it from different perspectives, you see different faces. And then we also went in and took some of the rubble from the ground and used it to make some accent pieces, and also teeth in the face, where he painted the bricks white and created the mouth of the face that he's been painting. So again, just blown away by the creativity that people have and how they use the resources that are present in the space. And look at all these beautiful colors. This was just an ugly lot, and we're, just like we revitalized the building, we're revitalizing the lot and kind of expanding from free space. So it's a exciting thing to witness.
Yeah, so that was. Did I get this back up here? I was paying attention before. Okay. So 10 days later, murals all over the space, filled up the entire space. art, music, physically with furniture, with people, with ideas, creativity, events. Classes started immediately. And again, this was within, we're still within 20 days of even coming up with this idea and figuring out this thing was going to happen. So the amount of creative output that went into this thing from the very beginning was still beyond anything that I've ever seen in a contemporary project. I mean, certainly the output of something like Burning Man or like Ephemeral now every year is much greater, but in terms of the amount of time from start to finish of free space, the output is incredible. And I'll let Brittany kind of talk about some of the other people and spaces and things that happen.
Yeah, so these pictures illustrate more of what you saw when I was talking about in the video. At the top left is the garden space that came to us from Hayes Valley Farm. That's more of the lot on the bottom. On the right-hand side is one of the murals that happen inside the space. So in addition to the two pieces you saw by Ian and Dion outside, as well as Eon, we had artists come in, some of them painting for the first time, some of them do this pretty often, and do murals all over the entire inside of the building. So all of the white walls that you saw in the first video, by a few weeks into the project, were completely covered with art. These are some more of the people who were on the free space team, who were around often. That's FJ on the left, who is hacking away at something or another. FJ was a big part of the space, and the second version of Free Space had a bike workshop where he taught people how to make their own bicycles, and out of part taught people to build bikes for free with it. They could then take away with them. So the picture on the top right is another illustration of what was brought to the space. What you saw in the video that just played was going to the third floor, and what was there. And this is the first floor, as well as a mezzanine. And that on the right side of the photo was actually a slide that was made for Ephemeral that was brought into Free Space in the off season. Above that, the lights there are a pixel grid that was brought in that people would come in and hack on and play videos on. And this was the main space for events and talks that we had. The bottom right is a hackathon that happened. On the left-hand side is a lending library that popped up with books and we're reading it. And also, so all the photos we have of the lot are before the lot was fully activated. What happened with that space was that shipping containers were brought in, and it turned into another one of the free space projects, which is called the Learning Shelter. The shipping containers were filled with maker tools, and it was a prototype for a program which taught people who were homeless maker skills. This is actually the second free space, but it was a really good example of free space existing further outside its own walls. With a piano and casters that was rolled into UN Plaza. This happened also with something that we did called Free Flower Fridays, where we picked up flowers from a local florist shop. Literally a truck bed overflowing with flowers every week that they were going to throw away that we then took and shared with people on the street. As well as just running around and sharing music. And another thing that we had that was mobile was what we call the park cycle. And it was a vehicle that was pedal powered that had dirt and plants on it that we would have little mobile parties on Urban Horizon and that photo. Oh yeah, that's it on the left hand side. So throughout the course of the first month of Free Space, we had 213 events, an account of about 10,000 people coming to the space.
One of the things that I didn't mention at the beginning is this kind of spawned out of the National Day of Civic Hacking, if anybody's familiar with it. It's a nationwide event talking about hacking cities. Most people took the course of doing something around technology, using data and ways to visualize cities or ways to better interact with your city. We hacked a building, and our reward for hacking a building in the way that we did was to get to go to the White House. We were invited as some of the champions of change for the National Day of Civic Hacking to come and talk about the project that we had worked on and the impact that it had on the community. So some of the nitty-gritty. These things are a whole lot of fun and they're a whole lot of work. And it was called Free Space, but it really wasn't free. Being the guy that ran finances on it really wasn't free. But we got a lot of support from people along the way that wanted to see it happen and were able to give us the funds at the beginning to make the project work. And then we were able to crowdsource money from the community as well that wanted to continue to see the project progress. So in the first month, we actually received a $20,000 donation from Levi's, the jean company, with no strings attached. We went with the motto of no ego, no logo, and their logo appeared on nothing other than our sponsors page on the website, where many of our other in-kind sponsors appeared as well. And the money went towards insurance, utilities, rent, the things that you need to just operate a space. But at the very beginning of the project, we set the expectation that all of the events that happened in the space would be free, that there would be no money exchanged hands inside the building, and that everything that happened inside the space would be inclusive. So with those principles in mind, that guided all of the events and all of the projects that happened inside the space. So not only did we not accept money from people who wanted to charge, well, we didn't allow people to charge for money for things that they wanted to do, but we were actually then able to just have the conversation of, oh, well, we have this money. This is the amount we need for our actual operational costs, so let's give the rest away. So we were able to support projects in a limited capacity after we covered our costs. All told, throughout the project, we raised about $46,000, and the first month, our rent was $1. The second, it was increased. We ended up paying about $16,000 in rent over 6 months for the space, which was covered through the donations and various things that we were able to bring in. And as Brady said, with 10,000 people coming through the space, running over 273 free events by the time the space closed 6 months later in October, having a space like that in Soma, San Francisco for about 16 grand for 6 months was just unheard of, and the things that we could do with it were really impactful. So what happened next? After this space closed, there was a large group of people who wanted to do a second space. Because this happened for 6 months and we were open 12 hours a day, there was a lot of volunteer burnout. Nobody's being paid to do this project, everybody was just doing it out of passion, so the people who were continuing to do it were doing consulting on the side, contractors who had the ability to keep paying their rent. I stopped paying my rent and moved into free space because I thought that was a good idea at the time. It was great. And other people just couldn't continue because of the impact that it had, so we ended up with kind of a different group of people who helped start Free Space 2.0. While San Francisco Free Space was happening, free spaces were also popping up around the world. So we got a lot of press written about us in that first 6 months, and people picked up the idea and ran with it. It was never intended to be ours in terms of, hey, this is Free Space and look at us, but hey, this is an idea, we're calling it Free Space, you can do it wherever you want. And we worked with groups like CCA, who sent helped us design kind of a curriculum or like a guidebook, a playbook that we were able to give away to people to help create their own spaces. This is a picture of Free Space Japan or Free Space Tokyo. We had Free Space New York, Paris. I think there's one happening now, at least one that I know of, that's in Portugal. And they've decided to do, Portugal or Barcelona? They've decided to do 1 week a month rather than having it open the entire time, which gives them that ability to have volunteers who connect to their lives, rather than make this become all of their life. And so we've seen a lot of people pick up the concept and the idea of how do you create these temporary spaces that provide free public space and the ability for people to gather together in the commons, which doesn't really happen very much inside cities. There are even very few places that you can think of in San Francisco where people are able to just go and be and not have to pay money to be in that space. And one of the things that then, once you have a space that allows people to just spend their time in, having the diversity of people who came to Free Space just to see what it was and to participate and see what was going on was sort of the next level of just sugar on the dessert, because it was amazing to see how many different groups of people came together for totally different reasons. You saw sewing, you saw dancing, you saw gardening, there were parties, there was ping pong, there was kind of everything that you could possibly think of, every cross-section of people that I've met inside San Francisco who were there inside of Free Space.
So one of the questions that Eric posed was about temporary autonomous zones, and the question about something temporary, the ability to create change. And I think that's a really interesting question for a project that was meant to last for 30 days. That gave them momentum to last even longer, to have a second iteration, inspire people to create more free spaces all over the world. And I think another interesting way that this created lasting change, so something that happened during the project that a lot of the team members experienced was people expressing that they were really sad that the first location was closing. This to them felt like the end of the project and the end of the idea. And I think it took some time of watching the project end, of watching new ones start up and it themselves at their closing times, and kind of stepping away from that and seeing how people's lives were changed by this in a really big way. One of my favorite Free Space stories was that I was taking a lift to work one day, and I invited the driver of the car to come and check out the space. And he became our in-house electrician and was there almost every day. Became a huge part of the project, and it became a huge part of his life. And I've seen other big projects come out of this. I would say in some ways, the space you're sitting in, the Red Victorian, is one of them. One of the founders of the space, Jessie Kate, was also on the Free Space team, and that's how Kyle and I got to know her. And I think in a lot of ways, being in a space that was so radically inclusive and different has really inspired the way that we treat our space now. It makes it feel really accessible to have a living room that's also very public, and a place that we want people to gather and we want people to experiment and change and play with what's going on. A lot of spaces have a specific purpose. If you come to them to do one thing, it often involves money changing hands. And the really radical thing about this that I think stuck with a lot of people was the idea that it's a third space. You're not coming here to work. It's not your home. It's not a business. It's just a place to be, like Kyle said. And I think the nature of that had a big impact on everyone who came through this space and walked in the door and was told, this space is whatever you want it to be. What do you want it to be, and what do you want to do here?
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This was really interesting to hear those projects sort of articulated by people who started them. Having participated in both of them was really nice to just sort of hear the thinking behind them. I'm really curious, it seems like, you know, in both cases and spontaneous case as well, like it seems like we're really good at making fun things happen. Like, and it seems like, you know, you can't get people excited about a project that's not really fun and that doesn't involve art and music and dancing. But I'm curious, like, what are the prospects of these types of projects extending beyond the fun and like getting into the really serious details of like taking care of people and meeting needs and like and doing a better job perhaps than our current society does at like taking care of the dispossessed and whatnot? Does anyone want to answer that question?
So one of my motivations, so I'm an enthusiast for seasteading. Like I want to see it happen. But it's a lot easier to get people to come to a big party than it is to get them to come to a lecture or a class or whatever. And they'll keep coming back to parties as long as the party's still good. And so my motivation is for people that are in countries in circumstances where they're oppressed or they're in danger to be able to escape. And I don't think ephemeral itself is going to lead to that. I mean, if it gets as big as, say, Burning Man, there's going to be a lot of resources to build platforms, even platforms that could, and structures that could survive in the open ocean. But I think for a party, being in a somewhat safe waters is better. What I do think it does is it provides inspiration for people to see, oh, I can live on the water. Oh, you can have different cultures, different societies living near each other without one overarching government dictating each of the tracks. And so I see it as an outreach mechanism. It's a way to teach people in a toy environment, in a microcosm, what could be happening in the broader world. And so to that extent, I think it could lead to seasteading technology being developed later on. That has required investment and can provide for the things that the basic necessities, the things that aren't fun, sewage and power, and safety, and things
like that. I would never impose free space on a group of people that were in like dire need of care. It's in and of itself just the anarchy, the chaos that happened inside the system lends itself really well to ideas and creativity and experimentation, which are things that are very comfortable to do in a low risk or, you know, at the end of the day, you hope nobody's going to die, but there aren't a whole lot of possibilities for people dying, right? Going off the slide, maybe. You know, there just aren't a whole lot of things that could have ended in catastrophe. Maybe the building burning down. That was always my biggest concern. But the things that came out of it, the ways that people went into came out of the project, the ways that they thought about systems and about the structures that were applied to their lives on a daily basis, and you could see people's perception of the world changing as they came to the space every day. You know, some people, we had a guy who it was his last day at Apple, and he found the space the day after, and it was like, you know, the light turning on of like, oh my God, this is possible. This wasn't something that I'd ever even like come in contact with before or had any idea about, and it kind of really just shaped the way that he thought about how he goes about interacting with different communities. And similar stories arose from all kinds of different people where they just started shifting a little bit from the like, this is the way things are, and this is what I have to do, to like, oh, these other things are possible. And so I can take this kind of creativity and learning and bring it over to whatever structure it is. So whether that's healthcare or whether that's homelessness. We dealt with a lot of homelessness and poverty issues being at 7th and Mission, and certainly being in our second space at 6th and Market, and people that lived in the space that were homeless, that it gave them an opportunity to spend time in the space and just kind of be creative or do something that felt valuable to them at the time without it having to have any like greater meaning. You know, we weren't providing services, we weren't providing meals, though meals did show up. But it gave people this kind of human sense of community, I guess, at the end of the day, where you weren't being asked to do anything other than the things that you wanted to do. As long as you were respectful and courteous with the people that were in the space, then you were welcome to be there, and you were welcome to participate in the ways that you thought meaningful.
I just have one more question, and I want to turn it out to the audience in case there are any questions out there. So it was sort of brought up, I think, at multiple points that these moments can actually be seen as like integrated or intending to reform existing institutions rather than just like breaking out of them and just existing outside of them. So you know, the idea of you make a seasteading city that offers better rights and protections than do you know, existing cities, and that sort of exit makes possible a type of like democratic reform in those places, which will then be competing for those people not to exit their system. So that's the ephemeral example, and I think perhaps in the free space example, like civic hacking is clearly like a moment in which you are providing or producing those things that the system's not super great at producing. You sort of make up or augment that, augment that system, produce that sort of surplus. And the idea is then eventually it falls back into the system. It's the same with tactical urbanism, right? You're like, man, this city really needs more space to do active behavior in the city. So why don't we just test it out? We'll just prototype it in reality, and then later on down the road, the city can actually implement that formally when they decide that they want to budget for it through large group network. So I think I'm really curious about how these moments of temporary autonomy either integrate into the existing systems or intentionally disintegrate. Like what are those moments of like break or like sustained autonomy? And what are those moments of like attempting to reform or integrate into or make better what exists? Makes sense.
Sure.
I think that's a really interesting question in the sense of free space, because there are some things that we were doing that we looked at and said, like, wow, it's perfect, this is 30 days and gone, clean sweep. And the fact that it was so different from what was expected was in some ways what made it possible. For example, you can't just paint your building whatever you want with murals on it in the city of San Francisco. You get a notice that says that you need to repaint it in 30 days. But also, whether it was intended or not, the city did take an interest in what was going on and was actually responsible for sustaining the second location. And is also interested in studying what happened and finding ways to replicate it in sustainable ways. And you could argue that that's then now a totally different thing with some similar values. But I guess I would call that integration in some way. There's definitely different ways to critique what happens then when a government takes an idea like that and tries to adjust it to fit in with their model. It becomes very different.
I'm having trouble thinking of things that we did that to incorporate, but I think I would say that we discovered that there are some things that government does that we appreciate more as a result, or practices, I guess. So, for example, if you're on a boat, it's traditional to have a very strict chain of command it becomes clear when you're in an emergency situation like this, that's the case, because things move fast and you don't have time for diplomatic discussions about how best to release the anchors so you don't crash into the island next to you. So I would say, I'm not sure, I mean, obviously I think there are things that form the core, but for us it was more discovering the things that were important that us do.
Yeah, does anyone else have any questions?
Sure. Answer to that. I have another answer to that. One space I would
Oh, let's do that first. Yeah, go for it.
Partially. One space I was involved, helped to create a few years ago called Launchpad. We did something kind of in the in-between space. Like we've been hearing talks about making an area where you don't need money, but that it actually required a lot of money. And we found a way to create a space that was sustainable without any funding or donations, but did charge for some things, but didn't charge for other things. So it was like we kind of found that balance. Like we had free events, we had free access to computer labs and shops. We charged for some classes, we charged for some art spaces, and for the people who lived upstairs. I just wanted to, I don't know. It seems like there's a certain compromise or balance that has to be struck with anything that we do, unless we're going to be completely, out at sea or whatever. You have to figure out how to integrate. It's not whether you can integrate, it's how do you, what are your priorities, what are you willing to let go of, what are you not willing to let go of.
So in the sense, it was almost like one of those port things I was talking about, where you sort of have an organization that sustains itself in the economy, paying taxes, whatever, but then it makes free space available for other things. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say it's somewhat akin to free space, structured a little differently, different compromises, different prices, but kind of accomplishing. Just pointing out that there's different paths to that, and a lot of us work in isolation. Like we didn't really know anybody else who had done much of that, except for Cell Space. We've done Cell Space before, and they went another path. If you guys remember that place. I thought about writing a book about it, just to be like, hey, here's a path, and I have been told that people who have seen the website, we had a website that kind of talked about the path, that occasionally somebody would say, hey, we were sort of inspired by that, or trying something similar to that, like free space. Not anywhere near on the scale of free space. You guys have really taken off. But anyway.
You guys are selling out?
No, Launchpads existed for about 2.5 years. We sort of, one of the things that we did is work to deal with a nonprofit that owned a property that they were planning to tear down eventually. So we made a deal to be like sort of the last tenant, so that they wouldn't have to worry as much about, they would have a resident, keep people from coming to the crack house, but they didn't have to worry about as much about conditions there, and we didn't have to worry as much about, because they didn't really care what happened to the building. So it gave us a lot of freedom.
The second free space we got too. This building is still
Right.
down, but yeah, that's why we got it. Totally free the second.
And we'd love to have had a Launchpad too. I don't know, maybe someday.
Good question here.
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of these things happen with like a burst of energy, and that kind of makes it possible, but not sustainable. I'm curious what changed when you did your second free space, which was meant to be more permanent. Did you have to start paying people, or how did that work out?
Yes, we did.
When we started the second free space, we knew going into it that we had money, because we got a $40,000 grant from the city to do the second space. And the people who were running the second space were also some of the same people that had run the first space. Like I said, I moved into free space, Brittany moved into free space with me, and we really didn't have any sustainable income at that time. So in order for us to continue with the experiment, we figured out how we were going to staff it the second time, and it radically changed the way that the thing happened. It was not the same kind of energy, and we were, beholden to the city in some regard for fulfilling our grant, and it's basically just filling out paperwork at the end of the day. Who knows if they ever read any of our reports, but you know that there are certain things that the city wants to see, and so you have to program some things around their expectations rather than no expectations, right? Just see what goes on, see what happens.
No such thing as free money.
Yeah, no such thing as free money. Which is why making money to support your project seems like a much more sustainable way to do it. We do that here at the Red Victorian. We have a hotel that actually supports the operating budget of this building, which then allows us to do free things and use the rest of the space however we want, as long as we can continue to pay rent and pay our operating expenses, everything like that, right? The thing that you mentioned about huge bursts of energy to start projects, I think is always the case, regardless of the project, right? You come up with a great idea, a bunch of people want to get on board, you get this huge burst of collective energy at the beginning of the thing, and then the question is how long can you sustain that for, and what does that kind of sustainability look like? Is it nonprofit? Is it just that it doesn't take up as much time, so you're able to do it for longer? If it's a one event a month sort of thing, it's much easier to do than if it's a 12 hours a day sort of thing. Even if you're getting paid 12 hours a day, it's a hell of a lot of time to spend on a project. And so it ends up just, where do you strike the balance on your project between all the way on the passion side, completely doing it because I believe in it, because it's awesome, and because I'm really passionate about it and I don't need to get paid, and then the far other side of the spectrum of like, I'm doing this thing that pays me a lot of money but that I don't believe in, right? And that ends up just being the thing that we struggle with in any one of these projects. Is how do you make it sustainable? How do you make people excited about it and keep them excited about it? And how do you make sure they don't burn out? Because that's just inevitable most of the time with really large passion projects.
I guess I just wanted, it's not really a question, I guess it's a comment, and it relates to something that one of our speakers said a month ago. Andrew Hirschis made this point which really struck home for me, which was, fuck sustainability if it's at the expense of change at all. And it really was great, because I was like, yeah, like, if you're, anyway, it landed for me. I think we tend to think about a project's legacy and in terms of what is physically lasting after the event. But actually, I think the legacy of a lot of these things is behavior change. I just think it's really important to think about that. These spaces may not exist, ephemeral and spontaneum, and free space may not exist after the event, but if we can see behavior change, that's a really important legacy. Yeah. I think Brittany had a...
Sorry.
Response to that.
I just want to say really quickly that I completely agree with that. That I think that's what made free space itself possible and magical, is it was kind of like, fuck all, we're out of here in 30 days, like, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You can say yes so many more times when you're not worried about lasting things scaling, what it's going to look like in a month or two, what your landlord's going to say.
Cleaning up after yourself.
Cleaning up after yourself. So yeah, like sustainability means that you can make a lot happen and make big change in the way that people think.
Like for other people who want to do these sorts of things, but framed as, you speaking to your former self before you did this, what kinds of things would you tell yourself, like tools, tricks, tips, things you didn't expect? What did you wish you knew before starting these projects?
Wishing you had a hand for that.
I think if I could go back in time and talk to the people in Ephemeral, I'd say make greater efforts to talk to people who have been voting for a long time and who live in the Delta, aware of the weather patterns and the current patterns there, so prepare for them. Because we had several years of sunny weather, no problems, and got hit with a storm. We were prepared. So we were prepared after that, more prepared anyway. But that's what I did for myself.
Okay. I don't know if there's anything I could have gone back and said, hey, do this differently, and things would have happened differently. I think the beautiful thing about getting involved in projects like this is that you don't know what's going to happen. And we all don't know the things we don't know, and there's no way to learn them ahead of time. The only way is to do it and screw up and learn, right? And when you do a project that doesn't have people's like financial livelihood on the line, I guess, like, you know, if we're all part of a company and we're all getting our paychecks paid, and I as the leader decide, hey, we're gonna go over here, and as a result of that, the thing fails, and now you're all out of a job, and you know, no longer can afford to pay your rent, then there are huge consequences to that, right? And so you have a much higher burden on yourself to be able to make the right decisions, or feel like you're making the right decisions. But in the context of doing something that is really just intended to shift people's perspective, to be an experiment, to just try it out, you don't have to worry about those same sorts of consequences at the end of the day. So they're the perfect things to actually gain that kind of knowledge that you can then take with you into the next project that you do. Like, I look at the Rectorium very much in that way. When what Brittany and I learned from Free Space, from the chaos that happened there, from the thousands of people that came into the building, from the non-sustainable aspects of it, we were able to bring to this space and now apply that same learning to a space that, you know, now isn't temporal in the same sort of sense. We have potentially 20 years in this building, so the consequences of failing are higher if it goes in space, but we know certain things to avoid because we were able to make those mistakes with those kinds of spaces.
I was 20 years old when I stumbled into Free Space, and I had no idea what I was doing. And in a lot of ways, that was what gave me the ability to dive into it fearlessly. So I knew what I know now. I probably wouldn't have learned as much from it because I would have been more careful, or you could say more smart about my time.
Yeah, with Spontaneum, I think that we're really fortunate in that it sort of is redefined every time we have an event, and so it's cool. Like, I don't have to lament what I've done or like struggle too much to start again. I mean, we do it anew every time. I think though, what I would like to do moving forward is to be better at reaching out to like people who are really different from me and see what they want to do and just like empower them to do that. Like, just be like, we have like tools and stuff and like a bunch of people who can come to the things if you want to make it happen, or you can just invite your friends or like whatever. I don't know, it also feels kind of shitty to me to like go to some people and be like, I'm gonna enable you to do the things you want to do. Like, they probably already are doing what they want to be doing. Like, lots of people are doing what they want to be doing. There's also a lot of people who are not doing what they want to be doing. And so I think just like approaching that in like a sophisticated way that like brings this type of culture to more people, or makes, I don't want to say brings this culture to more people, but enables people to do what they want to do, I guess, more effectively. I think it's really interesting. Like, with space. Yeah.
I just wonder about, do you guys have like on the top of your minds or on the tips of your tongues, like other groups and examples of temporary autonomous zones that are exciting? If you just can like list off a few that are from history or from around here or from faraway lands or whatever, just what else is going on in space? Even people who like maybe get on a panel and just show up.
Yeah, I can just talk about a couple of the people I was interested in having on the panel. A guy named Chris Carlson, who started Critical Mass, which is a really interesting temporary autonomous zone that is a drifting zone, right? It's a big bike ride protest thing that happens every month and has been going on since the 90s. Really interesting, tons of like political ideas behind it. I think they were reading Hakeem Bey when they started the organization, but I'm not sure. And it's not really an organization either. Like, when the mayor tried to come down on it in the 90s, like, he just couldn't because there's no leader. Like, there's no way to shut it down or stop it. And when he tried, they just like went over the Golden Gate Bridge as like a fuck you can't stop us. So he's a really interesting person. I think, yeah, John Law was another person we were interested in having on the panel who started, among other things, Burning Man, but also Cacophony Society and Billboard Liberation Front and whatnot. I'm not sure all those things count as temporary autonomous zones, but those are some of the folks. And I'm trying to rack my brain of others, but I'll see what
Bike
else.
Party, Camp Gypsy.
Zone trip number 4 was.
Camp Gypsy?
Camp Gypsy's John and all these dictators.
We do autonomous fire jams every month in San Francisco. We get together, we spend fire autonomously. There's no leader, there's nobody that does it. We get together just in Urban Plaza. Everybody brings fuel, everybody kind of looks out for each other. We get together, yeah, we get together, we spend fire until people just start going home, bar stops running, so people leave like just to go home. We do that every single month. And they actually pop up all over. We do them in, I think there's one on Friday at Franco Gallup Plaza in Oakland. We do it at Lake Merritt in Oakland sometimes. Just temporary autonomous fire jams where just people come together. And because it's fire, and like a lot of times it's permitting, that's like necessary to do fire. We very specifically keep it as a temporary autonomous zone. There's nobody in charge, nobody pays to go. It's just everybody brings your own fuel, bring your own duvets, make sure that like we're all covering all of our asses and nobody gets in trouble.
East Bay Bike Park also comes to mind. Really fun monthly bike ride in the East Bay. I think there's a San Francisco one and a San Jose one. Probably in other cities too.
No, I haven't.
I don't know if this was what you were going on earlier about the dispossessed, but it's one of the assumptions or hypotheses here that, nomadic cultures are not coming back in most places, at least on any time horizon we can anticipate them. However, having, an abstraction layer of temporary spaces might replicate some of that for people who either due to circumstances or preferences simply want to live like that. So bounce off the question that was just asked about other examples. Are there any other examples of people who are looking at the part of the term sustainable, but ephemeral temporary zones for those people to find the necessities of life? Because a lot of our strategies of trying to shoehorn various circumstances lead people into dispossession or homelessness in general, don't work at scale. And the government, myself being a representative of it, is simply not making the choices to invest in any way. And maybe while we can't at the moment politically invest in terms of scale, altering the structure of it will accommodate greater people.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking to is this relationship between the zone and the state of exception that Giorgio Agamben writes about, which is there are these things that we're okay, our society's not about this, but there's a bunch of refugees now and they have to live in camps because we have nowhere else to put them, and that's just gonna be a little exception, but then the exception becomes the rule, and so these weird pockets or enclaves of misery often turn into a main or a mainstay of what's happening in society. And I think neoliberal economics are a similar thing where it's just we're gonna have hyper growth in this place, we're just gonna let the market do its thing and just be really good at doing its thing, and next thing you know the whole world is suffering under neoliberal market control, and there's no social welfare state or whatever. So these states of exception I think are really interesting in relation to this, but I guess the difference there would be that there's not autonomy. So I don't know, I guess you could argue that people who are escaping really difficult conditions are seeking some form of autonomy, autonomy from war or whatnot, but it's not autonomy in the same way that I think we more luxuriously think of the autonomy to express ourselves and the autonomy to have space to feel good in and be ourselves. These are really distinct things, but the relationship I think is a really interesting one. I don't know if that totally goes off from what you're talking about.
In part, and yes, and in part, no. Right? Just to make it more practical for a second, right? I'm a recent permanent move to San Francisco, although I'm a California native, and I'm trying to catch up on the state of homelessness in the area. And been reading up on the recent dissolution of tent community down just the dissolution stuff over the intersections, right? But because the city says okay, in order to deal with this issue, we need beds, we need structures, we need affordable housing, we need section housing, whatever, we just need more of the same type of housing instead of creating the enablements for tent-based society to exist for people in a safe way in terms of crime, in terms of sanitation, in terms of drug use, etc. We're trying to, skate not to where the puck is going with the community, but to our own structure, right? And instead, does that make them reliant on the state because we're creating preconditions for a tent society to exist somewhere? Maybe. But they're gaining back autonomy because they know it's not going to be dissolved by the state at some capricious later date either. Right?
Yes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's also true that there's a lot of nomadism right now with refugees and with people who refugees of the real estate market, that is people who are informally housed or homeless. And this, I think this response by the state to either try to solve these problems by conventional means, that is to bring these people into systems to give them land in the case of the Native Americans, or give them formalized housing in a big city, or dealing with the refugee crisis. But then there's also the tendency, I think, to make the state of exception work, right? To say, well, they're going to be in camps. We can't give all these people apartments, so they're going to be in camps, and we just need to figure out how to give them like bathrooms and stuff, how to make what they're doing work. In a way, it's like this top-down appropriation of the bottom up, or like a tapping into the resource of the bottom. It's like, oh, these people can get tents for themselves, so we don't have to do that. All we need to do is give them bathrooms. It's like this weird infrastructural project, but I'm not sure autonomy is really the project. It's more like society wants, governments want autonomy from the consequences of, the system that they perpetuate. It feels like, yeah. I mean, that's just me riffing on this idea.
We can go back.
Yeah. Are there any more questions from the audience? Yes. And we'll wrap up.
As someone that's very interested in these concepts, obviously we all are here, but I find myself often hitting the roadblock of inspiration. You talk about sitting around with 9 people and like coming up with the idea for free space and making it happen within 3 weeks. And I think that having that many energies invested into something like that is potentially one of the reasons why I was able to kick off so quickly and happen so readily. What would you say to someone that's struggling in the face of fear of failure of something like this? Like, what would you say for inspiration? Because this is something that's really important, I think, to create these zones to inspire and remind people that this is available, and that there is autonomy outside of the system. So what would you say to me or to someone that is really interested in these kinds of things, but does fear failure and fear a lack of support from the community?
My one suggestion really would be to read history and like check out people who've done it before and where they've succeeded and failed. I mean, it's sort of pointless to just repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So I feel like, reading about these things is really entertaining and amazing, and B, it's I think an educational experience, and it's nice to see that people have done for a long time all sorts of things outside their various systems, and then confronted certain pitfalls. So yeah, I feel like history is a really good place to start.
I feel like you touched on a few things there, which is like the idea of failure, which I assume is like you start something and then it crumbles and doesn't work the way that you thought that it would. And then like fear of lack of support from the community, which unless you've tried is magical thinking. So I would say that being confronted with those thoughts, like this is getting maybe like more theoretical, but redefine your definition of failure. If you think of something and you feel really passionate about it and you don't do it, you're failing yourself.
So I would suggest 3 things. One is start small. I mean, if I'm around limit now is like 500 or 600 people a year. It started out as a few people on house builds. So when it's small, short term, it doesn't matter if you fail. Do something else. Try something else. The second is if you do want to go for something big, and you need a lot of support for it, try to get pre-commitment. In other words, like, say often you run into this catch-22. I'll do it if you have X number of dollars. I'll give you X number of dollars if this guy will do it. And like, how do you? And so, like, what you can do is you can go to this person and say, if I can get the money, will you do it? Get them to agree to that. And then once you've got that agreement, you go to the person with the money and you say, this guy will do it if I can get the money. You give me the money, and then that guy does it. And you just identify all the things you need and get pre-commitments from each of the people before you go ahead. And then the third is I would recommend reading about Stoic philosophy and like envisioning the worst thing that can happen. Yeah. And like thinking really deeply about that. Like, what is it you're fearing? Is it people laugh at you? Is it you lose
money, because you'll get hurt or you'll hurt someone else. And then imagine in great detail that that thing actually happens. What would you do? And once you know what you would do, even if that worst thing that you fear the most actually happens, then you don't have to fear it.
So they just find the few people or the many people who share the same passion, and the energy of the people, you don't have to be the one driving it. That energy will be unstoppable if you find enough people or the right people driving it. It'll just happen.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I think it's really great that we're talking about these things that we have done, the ways in which people can do other things that build on or perhaps improve some of the things that have been done, to try to approach it also with an academic lens. I mean, it's a really interesting sort of mishmash of conversation and thoughts. So yeah, I hope some of you will come to the other Immanent Urbanisms talks. We have a wonderful lecture happening next week given by Amy Campos here called Adaptive Interventions, Transient Occupations in the Built Environment, which I think will take up some of these things, looking at the ways in which we actually adapt the urban environment to our needs over time. So that will be here next week at 7 o'clock, just like this. Anyway, thank you all, and see you next time.